Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and with me again is Karen Charles. Karen is an event specialist with Husqvarna Viking, and she's here today to show us how to use an embroidery machine for machine quilting, correct?
Absolutely.
Let's start looking at some of these samples that you brought here. This, first of all, let's start off with this beautiful whole cloth quilt.
This was a sample that I was working on just to experiment with how you could put a design together and keep it going. There's no piecing in here in the center part, and it's a great way to experiment, to just take a 44-inch square of fabric, put your batting and your backing together, and then just start going for it. Put your designs in and see how they line up. A great way. It doesn't cost you hardly anything. It's not, if you had put a quilt in here that had all the piecing, you might feel a little more emotional about it.
Right.
Sometimes it's nice to just be able to play, and in the end, I loved it so much I decided to add another piece to the edge. So after I finished working on the turquoise, I took another piece of the green, laid it down, stitched it and flipped it, and then kept going. This could be a queen-size quilt, and I could keep working on it in this way. My problem is I don't like to do anything more than once, and I was well done with it by the time I got this far, so I put a binding on it and called it a day.
Well, it's beautiful, and it's a great example of just the power of a whole cloth quilt. You just start off with a piece of fabric, and you can get something fabulous like this just by playing around. I love it.
And the nice thing is, if you look at the back, and I usually do use prints from the back because it's very forgiving, the stitching looks nice and it adds to it. It's not doing anything to take it away. And your results on the back should look as nice as the quilting on the front. But
that's the goal, at least.
Absolutely. That's always my goal. This is an applique that I created in this software, 60 Premier software, and we've appliqued that on. I put it all together, but this is a quilt design that's out here on the outside edge, and it was a rectangle, but because I was able to do it in rows, I just kept going out and created in that space. This is, you know, it's a real simple, easy design to do, but I think it looks really elegant, and it doesn't take away from the fabric. I really wanted the emphasis to be on the center applique, and I think the quilt design really worked with it to make that happen.
The stitching, did you use a heavier weight thread, or is that a double stitch?
This is a double stitch, and many designs are single stitch, some are double stitch. Some have a combination of both, depending upon it, but this one was a double stitch.
Okay, that's how you get that nice, really present look.
Right, absolutely. And you can see on the back I used another print. But you'll see the design is there. It kind of hides itself when you use a print. So if you're just beginning doing free motion quilting, or you're quilting with an embroidery machine, I always use some kind of a print because I think it adds interest to what you're doing. But you can also change your bobbin thread, the colors of it, according to what you're working with. If you're doing a white quilt with white background and you've got a darker border, then you can afford to lighten up your color of your bobbin, and you're not going to notice it as much on the back. And I think that's really nice to get that.
Let's take a look at this next sample.
This is, again, a very simple design. These are embroidery designs that were created ahead of time, and then the whole quilt was put together, and the quilting was done afterwards. And like most quilts that I do, when I'm putting them together, I will, before I start doing the embroidered quilt designs, I will stitch in the ditch so everything looks nice and straight and square. And then I can get rid of all the pins. I don't have to have any safety pins or straight pins, and they don't interfere with the hoops when I'm doing them. And if you look at an example like this one, this is a really pretty, I think that's a gorgeous quilting design.
It is.
And here in the outside corners, I simplified it a little bit by just taking the outside layers of it. But because of working with design positioning, and I'm working with the Husqvarna Viking designer Diamond Royale today, I can go in and really make sure that everything's exactly where I want it to be placed. Same thing with the border design when I did it. I was able to make sure that the design would come close to the border but not go over the border, and that's important to me. These samples here are quite small, you know, larger quilts would work just the same way. And I have a sample where I've done a quilt design in the middle of a queen size quilt, and it's gorgeous. It just adds such dimension to it, and I really love the way that it turned out.
It did. It's beautiful. So you were talking about the borders and how you get the borders nice and right up against your inner borders like that. So let's take a look at how you achieve that.
This is a quilt that we're going to be working with today, and I'm going to do an embroidery design here, which is a beautiful feather design. But if I was going to start with working in a border, there are special hoops that make it very easy to get your border lined up. Once you've put it in there, it just locks down very simply. And when I put my hoop on, I can check and make sure where the design's going to be and that it's straight. If it's not straight, I can just clip it up like this and snap it back down again. Once the design is done, I can lift it up, move the hoop down, and then I can lock it into place again.
And then because of the design positioning software, it knows exactly where to stop and start?
And in the many of the Husqvarna Viking machines, the embroidery machines, the Designer Royale, the Ruby, the Topaz 50, all have design positioning, which lets you go in there and be able to select a certain point and check and make sure the design's exactly where you want it to be. So for today, we're not going to be working on the border. We're going to do a feather design in this square here. And so I'm going to be hooping this up with a traditional hoop. It usually is a little easier for me to pull the hoop toward me and let it hang up over the edge of the table while I'm doing it.
Okay.
Because it falls into place a little bit better. And now I've got my hands to be able to manipulate things. And the goal when you're hooping it up and getting it going is just trying to find some middle ground where you want it to be. This is where I'm going to choose my place. And I'm trying to get it in there relatively straight. And to let you in on a little secret, these squares are not square. When I pieced them, I didn't do such a good job. Some of these are 7 inches, some of them are 6 7/8, and some of them are 6 3/4. And that's why it gets, a little bit here, but I'm not worried about it because I can solve that problem with the quilting.
If you quilt it right out.
Yes, you can. And the best part is when you're working with the designs, you can resize them to be exactly. So the design as it was created might be a 7-inch design, and I'm going to move this down a little bit more because I know I need to come down into that area. The design might be a 7-inch design, but I can make it be 6 7/8, or I can even unlock it and have the width of it wider than the height. And you wouldn't even notice it when it was stitched out, which I think is a pretty incredible thing for those of us like myself who don't always do everything perfect. Okay, we have our machine threaded up, and normally when I'm working on a very intricate design like this, I like the thread color to be tone on tone, like the fabric that I'm working with. For the sake of filming today, we're using a very extreme darker blue so that you can see the stitching.
Right, and some people like that look.
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
People, it's really, there are no rules.
Wait a second.
It's just what your preference
is. Place. And once I've got that done, I'm going to just slide it into the hoop, make sure everything's here. If this was a very large quilt, like the queen size quilt that I was talking about, I would make sure that the weight of the quilt was on the table, because that becomes very important. If the quilt is dragging on the floor, it's going to affect the way the embroidery unit is working. So by having the weight on a larger surface, this is a great surface to be working.
I would love to have this at home.
Absolutely. Now, to get our design up on the screen, here's our design we're working with, and it's a beautiful feather design. I was inspired by a feather pillow. This is a design that was done, and I love it. It's got a trapunto area, and everybody loves feathers, but I am not good at doing feathers free motion.
They're hard.
The reason why I started getting into using embroidery for quilting is because I can do the little tight stippling, and I can do many different kind of meandering designs. I'm not good at feathers. I have no interest in developing that skill. I love the look of it, but it's never going to be perfect enough for me. And that's why I like doing this type of thing with an embroidery machine. We've got our design in the screen, and we are going to go into our embroidery screen. And it is a one-color design, so I'm going to hide that. We don't need to see it. The screen is really nice and bright, and I can zoom in as close as I want to see where it's going to be. But the first thing we're going to do is place it exactly so it's going to fit into that area. Because right now, it's just come in the center of the screen. So I'm going to go into design positioning. And the same thing, I'm going to start at the bottom left-hand corner and put my marker stitch there. And then I am going to move that point to where I want it to be. The longer I keep my hand on it, the faster it moves. The other thing I could do would be to click and drag it up. And once I know where it's going to be inside here, excuse my reaching, okay, I'm going to move it to that corner. And then I can check and see what another point's going to look like, because I want to know it's going to fit in all the areas. So I'm going to check the top left corner, and I can see it's a little bit high. Now it could be that I don't have my fabric hoop tight enough, and if it wasn't really going to fit, what I could do was make the design smaller.
Right, like you were just talking
about. Right, absolutely. And then I'm going to go back, and I'm going to check all four corners to make sure how it's going to fit into there. So over here, we're just about perfect. You can see how tight I'm going to make this design. It's filling the whole area. It's not like I'm making it and it's going to be, you know, sitting in the middle of it, floating. I could do that, but there would be no challenge to that. I like to make it be that small. Now, at the end, when I've done all this, if I decided that I wanted to make it a little bit smaller, I could go back out and change the size of it. So this one is pretty much right on the bunny. Let's go back and touch the first one again and make sure that one's good. And there it is. And at some point, if you know that it's just that little bit off, just by snugging up your fabric, you can solve just about any problem. And we're going to, this was the only one that we had that was a little bit out. And so there we are. And we can see that it's in there just about perfect. And so I'm just going to snug it up. There we go. Make sure my hoop's all good. And now we're going to say okay, and we're ready to stitch.
Okay.
It's going to come to the first part, and I'm going to press the start button. It cuts the first thread. And a quilt design is meant to go continuously without stopping and starting, so you don't have a lot of jump stitches with them. And there it goes. Isn't that amazing how it fits in there just perfectly?
It does.
Now, I didn't, if I was at home, I might have taken another minute to check a couple of the parts and make sure that this area here, you know, that everything was really fitting in there, but I'm trying to move things along. You can be as careful as you want to be, and if it's a real intricate design, there's certain places where you can go in and check as many. I could have checked 16 different places on a line to make sure it was correct every place. This is a design that I got out of a 5D quilt design creator. It was an artwork that was turned into an embroidery, and then I put it onto a USB stick and put it into the sewing machine. If I wanted to, I could have also sent it directly to the machine from the computer. But I usually like to have that hard copy on the USB stick, because if I can always go back to the computer, but it's nice to have something separate like that. Isn't that a gorgeous design?
It really is.
I think you're right. That color is actually turning out pretty well. There we are. The design's done. And we can take it out. And I will unhoop it quickly so you can see it on a... Now we've got this other difficult shape of a triangle here. And remember, if this was me doing this, I would have used a lighter color thread. That shows out really strong.
Sure does.
If that's the look you want, that's good. But I am much more forgiving to myself, so I tend to match my thread color closer to my fabrics. But for this triangle design, it's made up of actually 4 designs right here.
Right.
So in the software, I could go in and isolate that, and you'll see it's smaller than a triangle, but I can go in and enlarge it, make it higher and wider till it fit the space the way that I wanted it to.
Because you can adjust the measurements in the machine.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And customize it to the
and
exact
I can
size
change
you
it
need.
so it'll change the stitch count or not change the stitch count according to what I need.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
And showing us how you can use
so much
the
fun.
embroidery machine to achieve really gorgeous, beautiful machine quilting results. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters Community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.